town hall meetings that we had in Lower Manhattan through the mayor's special initiative for resilience and rebuilding. That's called SIRR, S-I-R-R. So I was sitting in this round table with 12 people at a table, and I said, investment tax credits. Came to me. Well, I'm a business guy, and I know the stimulating event, the stimulating effect of climate investment tax credits is amazing, because not only will it help get programs funded, it will create jobs, it will get projects moving, it will create economic growth. So the tax dollars that the governments lose will be more than made up with what we call the multiplier effect. So this multiplier effect is very powerful.
Are you going to get into that later in your presentation? Or is that kind of where you are?
Well, let's see, as I will talk more about it, but I wanted to talk about this. My stepdaughter is an artist, so she did this. And this is really the slide that I just used to go over, but this is about the people. As I said, there's a fellow named Klaus Jacob, who is one of the New York City's biggest climate experts. And he is very much concerned with the sea level rise, more so than municipalities. He believes in what he calls migratory efforts. He wants people to migrate out of the coastal zones into new communities. We are receiving enormous pushback from municipalities. I was driving here from New York to DC, and I saw Wilmington, Delaware. And you just look at that bridge, and you see that all the infrastructure is on the water, and it's really a problem. We have it too in New York City. 80% of our infrastructure is in flood zones, and the other 20% is right next to the flood zone. So these are major structural issues that if we are going to have sea level rise in these areas, which it seems like we are going to have, it's going to be a real issue. So what Klaus said, he was going to do the retrofit on his own house, which is in a flood zone in a little town called Piermont, New York. The cost was $200,000, and he was all ready to do it. But then the town of Piermont didn't have any plan. So he said, well, why am I going to, spend $200,000 if the municipality is going to flood? My house is going to be useless. The woman next door spent $400,000 already. She's redoing her house totally. And in that little town, which is a wealthy town, there's a 17th century structure that has been lifted 8 feet at the Hudson River. So there are efforts starting, but this community effort between the community and the individual property owners is what happened when beyond the investment tax credit idea, people were saying to me, you got to figure out another financing mechanism for all these buildings that have to be redone. And nobody has any money to spend on this $200,000 or $400,000 for your home or your business. There's no money for that. So I had to come up with a mechanism to finance that. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about this issue of sustainability versus resilience. Everybody's heard of these terms, right? So basically, resilience is the new buzzword. But I don't want you to forget about sustainability, because some of the authorities are forgetting about sustainability. They think resilience is everything. It's not. What we figured out is that sustainability is related to energy use. It's actually the way you can implement programs and projects to reduce energy costs. That's also something that we can finance. Resilience is primarily concerned with the effects of climate change, so it's a little more difficult to finance. That's why I thought we'd have to have an investment tax credit, because the only real payback, as Janine and I were talking earlier, is you have a future event that is going to be mitigated through the efforts of resilience. Very hard to sell that to a hedge fund. So, it's a public good, but it's also an insurance company good, because they're going to have less to pay out. It's also a utility good, even though the utilities haven't figured that out yet quite, that it's to their advantage. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this CRITC versus CRITC, because, as we've developed these ideas, things are changing very rapidly, because the whole area is evolving so quickly, which is great, because more and more people want to get into this thing. We're finally realizing that, the last 15 years of planning has been somewhat less than stellar, starting in Kyoto. And hopefully now we're on the right track. So the CRITC is designed for infrastructure projects that are for the public good, but do not necessarily have a defined payback. Because I'll show you in a minute how the CRITC works. The CRITC is what I was talking about with buildings. Most property owners have absolutely no money to put something in for something like this, right? Well, what's happening in our area is something called Bigger Waters Act. It's about flood insurance. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was passed in 2012. I actually have a meeting with one of the people who co-wrote that bill tomorrow. So that has been hurting the New York metro area because basically the premiums when somebody moves or sells their home zoom like 30 times maybe. They go from $500 a year to $30,000 a year.
For insurance.
Just flood insurance.
Flood insurance.
So what's happening is, you may or may not know that the National Flood Insurance Program is part of FEMA. It's a federally funded program that is bankrupt, and it's a big problem, and we're not sure whether they're going to privatize it or not. I'm not going to opine on that. I really don't know. But so what we came up with is a subsidy to provide equity very cheaply that we're hoping the insurance companies and the utility companies and maybe the municipalities, although I think the insurance companies are the ones who really are going to want to foot the bill for this because they can do a model that shows it's worth it. And it'll be those things like, raising mechanical systems, all the stuff we did at the wheel is going to be applied to a building. You're going to want to make it not just sustainable but resilient, and the ability to link the sustainability with the resilience makes it financeable. So they call that on-bill financing. What happens is the energy cost savings are actually financed. So the way my model works is 90% is on-bill financing and 10% is what we call a junior lien or a grant. I want a grant, my people want to call it a junior lien. I want a grant because I don't want to account for this junior lien, that hopefully we get a lot of buildings to be able to qualify for this. But that's an internal issue. Once again, my stepdaughter Cass. This is how the CRITC works. Getting back to investment tax credits. The key to the CRITC working is it has to give all the economic benefit up front because there's no payback. It has to work for an individual or a company up front. So when you put your money into the Natural Resilience Fund or some other entity that the governments agree upon, there will be a board that will say, okay, this project is a yay, this project is a nay, the money will be sitting in this fund, and suddenly, it'll go from a yay to an actual project, and then the individual or company will get money back at tax time. So what I did was I took Virginia, because I looked at your three municipalities. DC pays the most taxes, Maryland pays the least taxes, and Virginia's right in the middle. So I figured I'll give you the middle. Let's not look at the big guys first. Let's look at the little guy. Assuming you have like 50,000 of taxable income, what I've come up with is 5% could be invested in the Natural Resilience Fund tax credit, which means that you would get, you put $2,500 in, and the federal government would give you what I call a one-for-one credit. That means you get $2,500 off of your income taxes at the federal level. What that means right there is you're not out of pocket. That's money. If you pay taxes, that's money you would have given to the federal government. That's but all that is just money you would have given to the government. So you're not getting any benefit, but you're not doing it with any of the money that you would have, had to invest or pay down debt or go on vacation. On the Virginia level, I want a 50% state tax credit. So what ends up happening is for every $2,500, you'll get back $3,750. That's a real return up front. And what happens is if you tell the CPAs about this, they'll get it. And suddenly, when you do your taxes, and remember, my idea was not for this guy originally, the $10 million guy. It was originally for $25 or more. It was like an IRA idea. So it was really grassroots. But what's happened is the amount of money required is so high. Just if you take a look at New York City, the mayor's program has $20 billion of stuff that they want to do in the next 10 years. It's maybe, I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 50 to 100 years that would have to be done. So they are short $5 billion on that $20 billion. And that's New York City, which is one of the wealthier municipalities. So you can only imagine what, the state of Nevada has, or maybe Nevada's not a good one, Oklahoma, or West Virginia, because climate change is affecting everybody differently, and every state is different. So let's take the math down a little bit more. Assuming you had this $50,000 taxable, you would pay about $8,400 in federal taxes. You would